Hello everybody, and in this video I'll be completing the cockpit for Tamiya's 1/48 scale Dornier, and I hope everybody enjoys the video. After putting in a base coat of XF1 black, I paint everything with XF22 RLM gray, and RLM gray was the color typically used for the interior of aircraft by the Germans during World War II, and then it's also what's pointed out by the instructions. So I use just the X20A thinner to thin down these acrylic paints and then airbrush it on. With the RLM gray coat of paint in place, I can go ahead and paint details, and here I start off by using Vallejo Air White to paint the dials on the control panel of the cockpit. I continue painting some of the control panel detail, here using some Vallejo Air Red to paint some of the notches on the control panel. Most of these colors are picked out by looking at other people's work and as well as actual pictures of the cockpit. So here I'm just continuing with the red Vallejo paint and painting over some of the notches and buttons. And since I don't have reference pictures for all parts of the cockpit, sometimes I just have to paint accordingly to what I think would be right and what looks good to the eye. So here I'm just using the X11 Chrome Silver Tamiya paint to paint over some of the cockpit detail, and after that now I'm using the XF3 Flat Yellow to paint over the remaining buttons and notches that haven't been painted red. And again, a lot of this is done based on what looks right to the eye, since a lot of the reference pictures are in black and white. So here using the X11 Chrome Silver paint, I'm just painting the wiring of the bomb bay and the wheel wells, and any other metallic paint works like the flat aluminum XF16 or anything by some other brands. So in the spots where I put too much paint or just accidentally get off the wiring, I can go back in with the RLM gray later and paint it all to touch it up and have it nice and neat. So since the seat is lacking detail, I use Need-A-Tight green stuff to add more detail to it. And I add two cushions based on this reference picture here. So on the headrest you can see there's a cushion as well as on the center of the seat. So I add both of these things that are on the picture using the Need-A-Tight green stuff, and then with the back of my X-Acto blade and a toothpick, I go in and add creases and little folds just to add more detail to it. Now that the cushions have dried, I just cut off some thin slits of the green stuff to add seat belts, and I cut off two seat belts for the center portion of the seat, like the one I'm putting on right now, and then I cut off two smaller pieces that would go on the edge of the seat with the buckles attached to them, which would all attach together as a harness. And then once this is all dry, I go through and paint it all with some brown colors. So now I go in and paint the two cushions of the seat, and I do this using Tamiya XF72, the Japanese ground defense brown, and just paint these two cushions before painting the seat belts. Next off, I paint the seat belts using XF59 Desert Yellow, which is kind of like a light sand color. With the painting of the cockpit and all that finished now, I'm going to go ahead using the dull coat to seal it up so that I can do the weathering without damaging the paint job. And I use these testers, dull coat, gloss coat, with their assorted thinner, which is all from the same product line and meant to be used with each other. So I'm not using the gloss coat right now, just the dull coat. And since it's quite thick, like maple syrup, I just put in quite a bit of thinner to thin it down to airbrush consistency and then spray that on. And it works well for me, you know, it seals it up good, and then usually I've never really had problems with the undercoat of paint getting damaged. So that's what I'm going to be using right now to spray onto the cockpit, and after that it'll be on to the weathering. So now with the Tamiya Panline accent color, the black enamel wash, I go into the dials and just put some in to create a kind of glassy smoke effect on the dials, and I feel this is easier than painting it black and then trying to hand paint all the tiny details in the dials, because that ends up getting messy and all that, and it just looks like a sludge of paint. So just in this case, keeping it simple gives off a nicer effect in the end. And I also use the same black wash to kind of create a base effect of weathering on all the other parts of the model, so the cockpit and then like the Bombay wiring right here. And once all the washes are in place, I use some MIG enamel thinner, since this is an enamel wash, to clean it up, and a flat brush like I'm doing right here. So here I use some burnt umber oil paint to dirty up the sidewall a little bit, and I put some dots here and there, and then use this angular brush to blend it in. And then once it's all blended in, I use some enamel thinner and kind of damp up the whole thing, and then with a cotton bud brush off the excess so that the brown oil paint only stays surrounding the details and not on the flat parts. So I continue the oil weathering by also using Payne's Gray in the Bombay, and here I just painted onto the sides where there's protruding detail, and then again use the angular brush to scrub it around and blend it in outwards so that there's heavier oil paint surrounding the detail, and it kind of lightens out as you go toward the flat area. And here it seems like I forgot to fill out the ejection pin marks, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem since this is in the Bombay, and there's going to be like a support brackets for the bomb and then the payload after. So most of these pin marks should be covered at the end, and I hope it's not too much of a problem. So here I'm painting some of the burnt umber over all the bolts and the wheel well, and then I go in with my angular brush and blend in the direction of the bolts so that it covers them all. And then once everything's blended together, I can take a cotton bud and then brush off, or kind of scrub off the excess from the flat area. So here for the last part of the weathering, I'm using a silver Prismacolor pencil to highlight the exposed metal edges and do some chipping. So usually I use a paintbrush, but I decided to use a pencil for this model. And I think the pencil is actually really good because the pigments of the pencil are strong, and when you rub it onto the model, it leaves a nice metallic color on it, and it does look quite realistic. And on the other hand, with a paintbrush sometimes, since there's so many bristles, the metal color can get in spots where you don't want it to get. And with this, there's some pretty good control if you're just trying to get it onto the edges of all the pieces. Okay, so now that I've finished painting and weathering all the parts of the cockpit, I'm going to go ahead and put it all together and glue on the seat and control panel. And to glue the parts together, I'm just using some super glue instead of the green cap Tamiya plastic cement, just because the Tamiya stuff is really thin and it'll run around and might ruin the paint job. So this will give a nice strong bond without, going onto the paint. So one other thing I want to point out is I did just the cowl off camera, and pretty much I just put some dark gray oil paint on near the edge over there, and kind of blended it in and pulled it back just to darken up the cowling and not have the color so plain. So I finished up the painting and assembly of the cockpit, and I glued together the two fuselage halves and everything fit together nicely. So typically I don't spend too much time on the cockpit because I build 1/72nd scale airplanes, but now that I'm building more 48th scale, I feel it's definitely worth paying attention and weathering and painting all the different details that are in the cockpit. So what's left now is just to finish assembling the model, and then after that I'm going to paint it and weather it, and that's what the next video is going to be, the painting and weathering of this model. So I hope everyone enjoyed the video. I'm going to put a quick slideshow of the pictures of the cockpit and wheel well, and then lastly I hope everyone had a Merry Christmas, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.